Russell Wilson continues his dominance in a win against the Cowboys. The Storm are headed to the Wnba Finals, and we peek back in Mariners history and on this date in Seattle sports. Let's take it around the sound. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Around the Sound. Welcome back if you are a returning listener, and of course, welcome to Around the Sound for the first time if you've never been with us before. Follow me on Twitter at the Peyton Thomas and the Instagram for the podcast, which is at Around the Sound Seattle. Make sure you're following that Instagram and paying attention the next few days because we will have another Q&A opportunity for Saturday's edition of Around the Sound. We will have that Q&A posted most likely on Thursday or Friday, an opportunity for you guys to ask questions and get them answered on the podcast. So make sure you follow that Instagram account at Around the Sound Seattle and don't miss out on that opportunity to get your question answered. Every episode of Around the Sound is, of course, available in video format on YouTube at PTOM Media, PTHOM space media, or you can listen to the audio version wherever you get your podcast. Let's hop right into Week 3, the Seahawks versus the Cowboys. Yet another close game. It's the second week in a row that the game was decided with less than 10 seconds left. This time it was the second to last play of the game. Russell did get to go back on the field and take one knee in Week 2 against the Patriots. It was the very last play. So yet another very close game coming down to the wire. Russ had another 5-touchdown game. He had 315 yards throughout the air. And honestly, it should have been 6 touchdowns in the game if it weren't for that drop. We're going to start with it. We'll talk about it first. The DK Metcalf drop on the goal line. One of the most embarrassing plays I think DK Metcalf certainly has had in his career. I was really looking forward to being able to talk about this, and it was an infuriating play by DK Metcalf, especially for Russell Wilson fantasy owners like myself, and I'm sure it was equally as infuriating for DK Metcalf fantasy owners, but Seahawks fans in general. First quarter, DK Metcalf catches a long bomb from Russell Wilson. DK Metcalf got some separation from that secondary of the Dallas Cowboys and starts showboating into the end zone. A perfect deep ball by Russ. Yet another perfect deep ball by Russ, by the way. But starts showboating into the end zone, sort of. DK started walking, carrying the ball with one hand, sort of out in front of him, walking into the end zone, and 3, 2, 1, he's about to walk into the end zone, but there was a member of the Cowboys secondary, I think he was a rookie, I'm not sure who it was, did not give up on the play, so all credit to him, caught back up to DK Metcalf, who had basically turned off the Jets at this point. DK Metcalf was in a brisk walk, a brisk jog by the time that the Cowboys defender had caught up to him on the 2 or the 1 yard line, and basically peanut punched like Peanut Tillman did back in a decade ago. Peanut punched the ball right out of DK's hand, his outstretched hand, and the ball goes into the back of the end zone, out of the back of the end zone, out for a touchback, and the Cowboys get the ball on the 20. This is a really uncharacteristic move from a disciplined professional Pete Carroll team. Pete Carroll is among the best in the NFL for keeping his players disciplined, remaining professional throughout the entire game, finishing plays out every time, and it's really uncharacteristic to see a play like this. DK's a young guy, but I think the best news for everyone in this situation is from DK to Russell Wilson to Pete Carroll, everyone who was involved and watched this play has said repeatedly that this will absolutely not happen again. That DK Metcalf will never make the same mistake again. And knowing DK Metcalf's mentality, his personality, and the way that he plays the game, an absolute freak of nature, I don't think he will ever walk into the end zone again. Regardless of how much space he has, he could have 40 yards behind him, between him and the nearest defender, and I don't think he'll ever walk in for another touchdown. I would expect DK Metcalf going forward, especially after he got a talking to from Pete Carroll, a talking to from Russell Wilson, a talking to by all of the angry fans on social media, that he will never, ever give up on a play again. Pete Carroll said after the game, quote, "This lesson learned will help everybody, and fortunately we overcame it, and it didn't wreck the game for us." But it's a terrible play. It really is, because he got a touchdown, just finish it off, and he started celebrating too early. I mean, the bright side of the horizon for the Seahawks in this specific circumstance is it didn't cost them. The Seahawks were still able to get a victory on the day, but had Dak on that last play found a receiver, had the Cowboys tied it up, gone to overtime and won that game, there would be a lot more blame placed on DK Metcalf. Another reason that this play might be somewhat forgot about is a lot of people feel like DK Metcalf did make up for that play with a catch on the last touchdown that the Seahawks scored in the fourth quarter to go up by 7. He made a pretty great catch, and it proved to be the winning score, so many people believing that he did make up for it on that play. I don't know if you can make up for that type of mistake in a different game situation. If the Cowboys come out on top, DK Metcalf is the number one target to blame for everybody in the locker room, all of the fans. It's truly a boneheaded play, and I don't suspect that you would see it again for a type of player like DK Metcalf. I don't expect it, and I'm sure going forward he is going to be in a full-out sprint to the end zone every time he has some separation and won't ever do that again. So DK Metcalf, other than that last touchdown, was a little bit quiet that game. The receiver who really jumped back into the spotlight this game was Tyler Lockett, and I kind of expected Tyler to get out to a little bit of a hotter start, especially with how well Russell Wilson's playing. Tyler Lockett was a little bit quiet in the first 2 games. He got some receptions, but didn't really hit on any of the big plays that Russell Wilson had so many of in the first 2 games. Tyler Lockett exploded in Week 3 against the Cowboys, especially in the first half. He racked up 3 first-half touchdowns and was straight up too fast. He looked way too fast for a Cowboys secondary that couldn't really figure out the cloud coverage. They couldn't really figure out how to keep the Seahawks receivers from getting behind them, and as soon as Tyler Lockett gets behind them, Russ is going to toss that perfect deep ball every single time and torch the secondary. So a great game, a great bounce-back game compared to his first 2 weeks for Tyler Lockett in Week 3. Let's talk about Russell. First quarterback ever to record 14 touchdowns through his first 3 games. Those are crazy numbers. Just for reference, this year, the rest of the NFC West combined has 14 passing touchdowns right now. So Nick Mullins, Jimmy Garoppolo with the Niners, Goff at the Rams, and Kyler Murray at the Cardinals, who's also having a pretty solid year himself. I'm sure Kyler Murray accounts for quite a few of those touchdowns. All of those quarterbacks combined equal 14 touchdowns through the first 3 games. Russell Wilson's got 14 passing touchdowns through the first 3 games. Absolutely nuts. Just think about how much better, it makes me think about just how much better Russ's record could have been without that interception blip by Greg Olsen. If Greg Olsen, that doesn't come out of his hands, it doesn't get tipped out of his hands, that pick 6 by either Devin or Jason McCourty, one of the twins in Week 2, to start off Week 2 for the Seahawks, a better catch and there's no interception on that record, or the fumble by DK. If DK Metcalf finishes out that play, Russell Wilson finishes that game with 6 touchdowns, assuming everything after that followed by the same accord. But that would be 15 touchdowns, no interceptions, which would be even crazier numbers. And it just makes me think how much of a crazy good level Russell Wilson is playing at right now. The only blip in his stats really comes down to mistakes made by the offensive players who are playing around him. And I got to give credit to those guys. It's not really the blips I want to focus on. It's those guys who are enabling Russell Wilson to throw for 14 touchdowns. But the reason that Russell Wilson doesn't have 15 touchdowns, no interceptions, is mainly due to 1 or 2 individual mistakes by those guys around him. But they've limited the mistakes, and that's what's kept Russell's numbers just so good this year. Let's talk about the opposing quarterback, Dak Prescott. Another huge passing day against the Seahawks secondary. Dak played really well, I thought. He had 472 passing yards on the day. Bobby Wagner was pretty unhappy after the game. He was talking to the media early this week, really disappointed in how the Seahawks have played, not just in Week 3, but in all 3 weeks of this regular season, starting out how the passing defense has played. Matt Ryan got plenty of passing yards in Week 1. Week 2, Cam Newton was able to torch the secondary the same way. Dak following a cord with 472 passing yards in this game. And Bobby's right. There was a lot of talk after the game about just how great the run defense for Seattle is and how the run defense remains good. You held Zeke to under 35 yards rushing and just 1 touchdown. But I want to stop people from assuming that just because you stop Zeke from rushing well, that's a victory. I don't think that's a victory. I think that if you're a team like the Cowboys, if you're looking at it from the Cowboys' point of view, if you're Mike McCarthy, you're not going to run the ball ever. If you know that you can successfully pass on the Seahawks secondary over and over and throw 472 passing yards, it certainly wasn't Dak that lost this game for the Dallas Cowboys. It certainly wasn't Dak. And I don't think it was really Zeke either, because he had, 14 carries, but after a few of those carries early in the first quarter, Dallas just said, screw this, we're not running the ball. The Seahawks are going to keep being able to stop the run, but not the pass. Teams are going to continue to pass on the Seahawks defense and continue to torch them for 400, 500 yards until they start either changing the scheme or throwing more people in the secondary, getting some new faces out there, and showing that they're very capable of stopping opposing quarterbacks from throwing 450, 472, 500 passing yards a game. And the passing defense, the secondary just looks seriously injured. Jamal Adams went out with an injury. We'll talk about the injuries in a little bit, but they're really getting beat too often. I thought Trey Flowers, he could have had a pick this game, got beat at least once deep outside the numbers. And when your cornerback gets beat deep outside the numbers, when it's really wide near the sideline, there's no chance for either of those safeties or any of the linebackers in the middle to provide help. If you're a cornerback, that's the one place that you absolutely cannot get beat deep. You've got no help whatsoever outside the numbers by the sidelines. You have to keep your man contained. You have to stay behind him and not allow Dak to throw it to receivers that I hadn't even heard of. Have you heard of Wilson? I forget his first name, but for the Cowboys, there's a receiver named Wilson. His last name's Wilson. Caught 2 touchdowns and had quite the day. And never an NFL touchdown before that game, but scored 2 touchdowns for the Dallas Cowboys in Week 3. Let's talk about the injuries. The Hawks lost even more defensive starters. I mentioned Jamal Adams at safety, but also Jordan Brooks, the rookie linebacker who was filling in for Bruce Irvin. So Jordan Brooks fills in for Bruce Irvin. You lose him, the second stringer, too. The next man up is going to be Cody Barton, the backup linebacker for the Seahawks, but I'm disappointed that Jordan Brooks did go out in this game. I really wanted to see the rookie, the first-round pick, get more starting snaps on that defense. Jamal Adams going out really should have scared the Seahawks in that final drive, because without Jamal Adams back there, you already had other injury problems at the safety position, and you ultimately had what was a player called up from the practice squad activated on that day. It was Ryan Neal, I think, who made the interception at the end of the game to seal it. He was the hero at the end of the game. We'll talk about that play in a little bit, but significant injury problems on the defensive end did not help in Week 3. The Seahawks injury report just gets longer on the defensive side of the ball. And same story on the offensive side of the ball. We had both the guards, Damian Lewis, the rookie, and the veteran Mike Iupati went out with injuries. Damian Lewis was ranked the Pro Football Focus, the PFF, #1 rookie run blocker in the league. He was like the #6 run blocker overall. He goes out with an ankle injury. I'm sad to see him go out. I really thought he was performing at a high level and was a great piece, especially for a rookie. Really high ceiling, really a lot of potential for Damian Lewis. He goes out for a few weeks with an ankle. The opposite guard position, Mike Iupati, he's a veteran. He's been around the NFC West. He's been with the Seahawks the last few years. He goes out with a knee injury, which also should give another one of those backup offensive lineman guys a shot at that offensive guard spot going into the game against the Dolphins on Sunday. Finally, the most talked about injury of them all, and the most controversial injury out of all of them, is the Chris Carson injury. Chris Carson, the ultimate, or the prognosis, the conclusion of this whole saga is just strained ligaments, and he'll be back in a week or two. But the controversy is centered around a defensive lineman named Tristan Hill for the Cowboys. Chris Carson starts to go down off a run play. Tristan Hill basically does what's called a Gator roll tackle, what they call a Gator roll tackle in the NFL, where he grabs Chris Carson's leg as he's going to the ground and rolls and tries to roll the player down. It's an extremely dangerous play. A lot of times when defensive players Gator roll offensive players, it can result in significant ligament damage. Thankfully, very, very thankful for Chris Carson not to have busted an ACL, torn an ACL or an MCL there. And many speculated after that play that it was dirty. Pete said after the game that he was absolutely pissed about the tackle, everything that happened. And a few plays later, a few people gave Tristan Hill sort of the benefit of the doubt in that play. A few plays later, Russell Wilson gets rid of the ball somewhere, and Tristan Hill goes up and headbutts Russell Wilson. And I think after that happened, after the headbutt to Russell Wilson, I think most Seahawks fans, most people watching the game looked and said, okay, Tristan Hill might just be out here with bounties on the head of Seahawks players. Maybe he's playing for the Sean Payton of 5 or 6 years ago, the Sean Payton who was paying his defenders to injure and take guys out of the game on the opposing side. I do want to mention that while all of this controversy was going on around Tristan Hill, all of these suspect dirty plays, listening to the broadcast, the Fox broadcast, really bothered me. We had Joe Buck and Aikman, both sort of Cowboys homers who were assigned to the game. Aikman and Buck do quite a few games for Fox. I listened to them plenty of times, and they really shrugged off that tackle, that Gator roll by Tristan Hill as if it was nothing. Didn't really acknowledge that anything dirty would have happened, and I think most analysts of the game that were watching it in real time see that sort of play, see the Gator roll, see the player roll onto his side with the offensive player's leg in his hands and say, okay, that's not okay. That's not something that is taught when you're taught how to tackle, how to finish a player defensively, how to put them on the ground and end the play. That's not how you're taught to do it, especially the headbutt a few plays later that looked pretty intentional on Russell Wilson. I will say Buck and Aikman were pretty silent for both of those plays. The problem I have with Fox's coverage is both of these guys appear to the public and look out at the public as Fox broadcasters as if they are neutral analysts. They appear to everybody. They're in suits. They have neutral colors on. They appear to everybody as if they were neutral analysts. And look, I report on Seattle sports. I'm biased. I don't try to project myself to everybody on this podcast as a neutral analyst. There are certainly times in sports I've covered, games that I talk about where I am a neutral analyst. I wear neutral colors. I am completely fair to both teams. I'm not associated with anybody on these teams. But right now, when I'm doing a Around the Sound Seattle Sports podcast, I'm a Seattle sports analyst. I am looking at these games from a perspective of somebody who grew up in Seattle, who spent their time watching these teams. And that's really what I thought we saw from both Joe Buck and Aikman on the Fox broadcast is Cowboy homers. We didn't really see neutral analysts in that. As a broadcaster, as somebody who wants to go into the broadcasting industry, it just really bothered me to see that sort of side of those guys come out during a national broadcast, America's Game of the Week, against America's team, the Cowboy homers, sort of defending Tristan Hill's actions in that way. Let's talk about the final play, the interception that ended up sealing the game for the Seahawks. Dak snaps. There's about 10 seconds left or 12 seconds left when the play snapped. He scrambles. I think it was Benson Mayoa. Somebody got to Dak, and it looked like Dak was on the ground. It looked like his knee touched the ground. Somehow he stumbled, remained on his feet. It was a very, very impressive play from Dak Prescott to stay on his feet and give himself a chance in that play, because if he goes down there, the Cowboys were out of timeouts. There was only 6 seconds left on the clock at the end of that play. There was no way that the Cowboys would have been able to line up and spike it or run another play. He fired desperately into the end zone once he got back up onto his feet. The ball was thrown, intercepted by Ryan Neal, the defensive back who had just been activated from the practice squad that day of the game. He had never played for the Seahawks before that. Due to injuries, thrust onto the field, due to the Jamal Adams injury, thrust onto the field in that final drive, told to make a play, goes out and ends up being the hero that comes away with the pick. But I do want to say, when Dak Prescott did get back up to his feet, and that was an incredible effort for Dak Prescott to extend that play and give his team a chance, it wasn't fourth down, and there were still 6 seconds on the clock after the interception happened. So by the time that Dak was about to throw the ball, there had to be 8 or 9 seconds still on the clock. And he basically threw a Hail Mary to the end zone from the 30 or 35, maybe? No, it might have been even closer, 20, 24, something like that. Throws it into the end zone, basically a Hail Mary, puts a bunch of air under it, and by the time the ball comes down, there's 3 Seahawks in the area, there's 4 Cowboys in the area, just a cluster of players on both sides, essentially a 50-50 ball into the end zone. And I think if you're Dak Prescott there, it's not fourth down. The smart play, if you can look at it, hindsight's 20/20, they'll always tell you the right thing, but hindsight will tell you that Dak probably should have thrown the ball out of bounds there. He was out of the pocket. He wouldn't have taken an intentional grounding. He throws the ball out of bounds there. The Cowboys are able to line up for another play and give themselves another shot to try to get into the end zone on the next play. By the time Dak got back to his feet and put the ball up in the air, There was almost no Cowboys players in a good position to try to make a play on that ball. Ultimately, it is picked off. Seahawks win the game on the second to last play. Russell Wilson and the offense will go out there for one victory formation, kneel down to end the game, and the Seahawks squeak away with a 7-point victory. Want to give a special shout out to Shaquem Griffin, who also came back onto the team. He was on the practice squad, was activated before this game due to the Bruce Irvin injury. Due to the Bruce Irvin injury, Shaquem Griffin gets plenty of snaps in this game. You got to see him, if you were watching the game, on several different second and third down situations, pass rushing, trying to get into Dak Prescott's face, get into that Cowboys pocket, and I really want to give Shaquem Griffin plenty of credit. Pete said after the game that Shaquem has earned his spot on the team, and I felt like I absolutely agree. He definitely did. His presence was felt several times in Dak's pocket. I felt like Shaquem really had that energy. He had that fire lit under him like we saw in his college days at UCF, where he was just finding a way to rupture opposing quarterback's pocket and really get in and make a difference. So it's great to see him balling back with his brother Shaquille. And Shaquille also picked up an interception in this game, a crucial interception, a turning point right before halftime, which allowed the Seahawks to score one last time before halftime. Let's talk about a former Seahawk now. We'll kind of wrap up the game. Talk about Jermaine Kearse, former Seahawk. He has officially announced retirement. After leaving in the trade for Sheldon Richardson in 2017, he went to the Jets. He floated around the Jets offense for 2 or 3 years. Then he goes to the Lions to play under Matt Patricia. First game of the year, he gets injured, broken leg, significant injury that ultimately ended him on IR, and he just came out with the announcement early this week that he will be retiring from the NFL. But I think most Seahawks fans will look back at Jermaine Kearse's time in Seattle with a very positive view. I think most people love Jermaine Kearse. He was a homegrown kid from Lakewood. He was kind of living the dream, playing for the Seattle Seahawks. He made huge plays. He scored a touchdown in the 2013 NFC Championship game that was right before the Richard Sherman tip pick interception, the famous tip pick interception that sent the Seahawks to their second Super Bowl in 2013, their first Super Bowl win. Jermaine Kearse also scored the winning touchdown in that incredible comeback 2014 NFC Championship game against the Packers. The best Seahawk game, by the way, that I have ever attended in person. That game absolutely incredible with the onside kick. In overtime, Jermaine Kearse was the one who caught that game-sealing touchdown. So best of luck to Jermaine Kearse in retirement. Best of luck to his family going forward. I think he still does live in Seattle, so he'll probably return back into the area and be part of the community. So best of luck to him. Let's talk about the NFL in general, some NFL news. COVID-19 has officially hit a camp hard enough that it had a major impact. The Tennessee Titans are the unlucky winner of the COVID-19 lottery in the NFL. They have a COVID outbreak. 3 players and 5 staff tested positive for COVID-19 at the beginning of the week. Tennessee Titans have shut down all of their training facilities, all of their practice facilities until at least Saturday. The Minnesota Vikings, the team that they did play on Sunday, also have shut down all of their practice facilities as a preventative measure to keep any of the COVID virus from spreading in case they have it. Both of those teams will continue to be tested. This was bound to happen. I mean, COVID-19 wasn't going to stay out of the NFL most likely for the whole year. I think with so many players, so many staff, all of them go back to their families and all of their families go into the communities, the local communities. It was bound to happen where COVID-19 was eventually going to reach the staff and or the players of an NFL team. And this is just something the NFL is going to have to deal and adapt with over the course of the season. What the NFL does have in its favor is it has bye weeks, so there are opportunities for games to get rescheduled, teams that have a chance to make up games on their bye weeks in case that a game gets canceled. I do want to mention that while this is a developing story, so we'll have to see kind of we'll have to watch what unfolds and what happens. All of the games for this week, from the Thursday night game all the way to the Monday night game, are still set to go. We haven't had any cancellations on any of the games in week 4 yet, but I would not be surprised if we see an announcement from the NFL shortly on either the Vikings game or the Titans game. I think Titans play the Steelers this week, so we'll have to watch what happens. But this is going to be a problem going forward for the rest of the 2020 season. I think that the NFL, they got to watch the whole pandemic kind of spread. Obviously, this whole thing hit in March in the United States, and that was right after the Super Bowl in February. So the NFL got to kind of watch this whole thing develop, see how the NFL, see how the MLS, the MLB all dealt with the virus. They got to kind of watch, learn, see what worked, see what didn't. They opt to go with no fans in most stadiums, very limited capacity in other stadiums. I think that's a smart move on the NFL's part, but they probably have all kinds of guidelines in place for when a team gets a COVID outbreak. Obviously, closing the practice facilities for the week is one of those protocols that the NFL is going to follow for any team that has a positive coronavirus test. So we'll have to see what happens going forward. Best case scenario, the Tennessee Titans and Minnesota Vikings are COVID negative across the board by the weekend, and we're able to get those games played and stay on a regular schedule through week 4. Let's talk about the NFC West now. The Seahawks are the only team after week 3 sitting in the NFC West, still undefeated at 3-0. Both the Rams and the Cardinals were 2-0 heading into week 3. Both took losses in what ended up being very, very close games late in the fourth quarter. The Rams were actually down 28-3 up in Buffalo against the Bills, and after a crazy, absolutely spirited comeback attack, fall just short, and they almost snuck out with an incredible 28-3 comeback victory in Buffalo, but the Bills were essentially bailed out by what was a questionable pass interference call made on Cole Beasley late in that game. The Bills escape with the win. The Rams take their first loss of the year. Very, very fortunate for the Bills to be able to hang on. Getting up to that 28-3 lead, the Bills looked yet again impressive. The Bills had a great start to the year, looked impressive, going up 28-3, then really fell off. We saw the Rams, Jared Goff, really have a resurgence in the second half of that game. They actually got up in the game, but Josh Allen able to put them away on that final drive, basically on the back of that questionable pass interference call. I will call it questionable at best, pass interference call on Cole Beasley. So Rams take a loss, Bills walk away, and Bills are also 3-0. Cardinals also lost on a last-second field goal to the Lions, who really played a good game. I think the Lions had lost 12 straight regular season games dating back to middle of the season last year. Finally broke that streak, the Detroit Lions, against a 2-0 Cardinals team who had been playing really well. I thought Kyler Murray had been playing really well. Going into this game, the Cardinals offense just felt a little bit cold. I thought Matt Stafford did really well to lead them in that final drive into position for Matt Prater to kick the game-winning field goal with a 39-yarder. 49ers did pick up the win this week against the Giants, who aren't really a real football team. They almost look like a college team without Saquon out there. But Niners 2-1, obviously taking the loss in week 1 to the Cardinals. So that's the NFL. We will preview the game on Saturday between the Seahawks and Dolphins, and we'll stay tuned for more injury news, COVID news around the league as we get closer to week 4. But I do want to mention the Seattle Storm, Wnba. The Storm are headed to the finals after a 3-game sweep over the Minnesota Lynx. Game 5 between the Las Vegas Aces and Connecticut Sun happens Tuesday night, so by the time that this episode is posted, you will know who the Storm will start to play on Friday night in the WNBA Finals. But at the time of recording this, the game hasn't quite started yet, so I still do not know at this moment who the Storm will line up against in the finals. But with the Storm's 3-0 sweep, they certainly will have time to get rested and reset before heading into the final series, which will certainly give them an advantage heading into those finals. Breanna Stewart was lights out, absolutely fantastic throughout the 3-game series, what ended up being a 3-game sweep against the Minnesota Lynx. She had 31 points in a playoff game, a personal best in Game 3. Her personal record for the playoff game, is the actual record, which led the Storm to that victory. Let's slide into the last piece of the last thing I wanted to cover in episode 6 of Around the Sound, which is another segment of On This Date in Seattle Sports, our second edition of On This Date in Seattle Sports. This Thursday is October 1st, which marks the 16-year anniversary of Ichiro breaking the then 84-year-old hits record in a single season. That was 2004 when he was able to do that. The magic number 258 hits was reached on Ichiro's second hit of the night, his 3-hit night versus the Rangers, October 1st, 2004. To reiterate, the record was previously held at 257 by Francis Sisler. Many thought that the record would never be broken as the MLB drifted into a period where pitching became better throughout the second half of the 20th century until the Ichiro, that kid from Japan, comes over with a strategy of not hitting for power and hitting for contact and legging out singles his whole career. The ball, the bat, and the first base from that hit now all sit in Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Ichiro finished that year with 262 hits, a record that still stands alone today, 16 years later, and I can't imagine that record will be blitzed anytime soon, looking at the current state of Major League Baseball. That's pretty much all I got for you guys for episode 6 of Around the Sound, so thank you for listening. Stay in touch with the podcast on Instagram at Around the Sound Seattle. Do not miss out that opportunity. Should be on Friday to ask a question for the podcast. Get it answered on Saturday's edition of Around the Sound. We'll preview Seahawks Dolphins. We'll have plenty more news to talk about on Saturday. The Storm will know who they play in the WNBA Finals, and we'll start the WNBA Finals on Friday. Until then, be well, and thanks for listening.